Hello, I'm Robert Latham, and welcome to this initiative, which is part of the Marxist Studies in Global Asian Perspective, which is housed at York University. And we're recording this as part of our York Left Consortium, Reflections on Capitalism's Half-Life. And this initiative began as a blog focused on the political, economic, social, cultural dimensions of COVID. And a second phase of the consortium is beginning, and it's focused on theory and practice, specifically on what academic work can imply for today's living, struggles against capitalism, and for the advancement of socialism around the world. I'll turn now to my colleague, Raju, who will introduce our esteemed guest today and discuss his work and its implications. Raju.
Hello, my name is Raju Das. I teach at York University, and I'm pleased to introduce to you Professor Alfredo Saad-Filho. Alfredo is Professor of Political Economy and International Development at King's College, London. Prior to coming to King's College, London, he was Professor of Political Economy at SOAS. And of course, he has also worked for the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Alfredo has written or edited, I can't remember how many, at least nine books. So it's a massive amount of writing he has been doing over the last several years on political economy and on international development issues. He has been a prominent critic of the post-Washington consensus and of course neoliberalism. In fact, neoliberalism is a topic on which he edited a well-received book. It's one of my favorites. Those of you who have not seen the book, here is a copy. If you don't have it, just try to get at least take a look at it. It's one of my most favorite collections on neoliberalism. I use it in my classroom and in other contexts. He has also written about economic policies in many countries across the world, including Brazil. His theoretical work has been in many areas of political economy, including theory of value. In fact, I don't know where I have mislaid my copy of the book. One of the points that he makes, which I can relate to, given my own personal interest, this is what Alfredo says: value theory is indeed a theory of class and exploitation. That's a very profound and theoretically significant statement. Instead of me talking about Alfredo's work, let's hear about it from him directly, and then we will we'll proceed from there. So in other words, okay. So this is an interview. No, I should have said this. So there's a two-part interview basically. We will first hear about his intellectual work, and then in second part, we'll hear about the more practical implications about which Robert will ask him. So the precise question is this: what have you been researching and writing about in the last 5 to 10 years or so, and what do your writings say about society, the society that we live in, and especially its major problems? Alfredo.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Robert. It's really lovely to be here with you and to have this opportunity for a conversation with you. The issue that I have focused on most closely in the past 5 to 10 years is the question of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism understood as the current phase, the current configuration, the current mode of existence of global capitalism. And what I want to do, and what I have tried to do, is to understand the way in which the broad social relations that structure and define the capitalist mode of production, how do they exist at our current moment in time? Now, if you look back, capitalism has existed in different ways, has existed currently as neoliberalism, it existed as Keynesianism, it has existed in the form of developmentalism, has existed in the form of classic liberal capitalism before the First World War. What is it that is constant and what is it that has changed? That is something that I want to understand. And then how do you move forward within it? If we look in a very abstract way at the way Marx describes capitalism in his work, particularly in the 3 volumes of Capital, that is still here. Absolutely. Those fundamental elements of the mode of production, they are still present, but they are placed at a very abstract and at a very abstract and general level that will not appear in the same way over time. I want to understand how they appear today. So I have a preoccupation with what is a constant and continuing about capitalism, and I also have a preoccupation about how is it that capitalism appears at each moment in time. That is this particular concern. Behind this is the question of change. How do we move forward the struggle of the people who are exploited, marginalized, discriminated, disadvantaged by the social relations of capitalism as they exist both in general and at this particular moment in time? How do you put forward the revolutionary struggle in our day and age? And this is contextual. Progressive movements to transform, to revolutionize, to abolish capitalism, they have to be grounded in concrete struggles, predicaments, and features of the reality that exists. So I want to be sure that we can understand capitalism at the different levels in which it exists materially in the world in which we live, in order to be able to understand the best way forward in terms of popular struggles to abolish this mode of production. That is the driving idea behind my research.
Can I just interrupt you for a second, Alfredo? You have been also working on the turn to authoritarianism. Would you like to say a few words about that part of your work?
I have focused on the question of neoliberalism for some time. And then it is apparently it is evident that neoliberalism itself has changed. We are not in the 1980s anymore. We're not in the 1990s anymore. What is it that has changed? And how do we recognize when neoliberalism itself has changed and has morphed into something else? How would we have recognized the shift away from Keynesianism 40 years ago or whatever into neoliberalism? At what point do we say that form of capitalism that existed before, that was dominant after the Second World War in the advanced economies in the West, that has shifted into something else? Now, do we see shifts within neoliberalism? We do. And we see shifts in the economic domain, but they are particularly apparent in the political domain. In the 1990s, you have a sort of neoliberal democratic political consensus across most of the world, and certainly in the West. The so-called international community, the international community that invaded Iraq, the international community that basically occupied the Eastern Bloc with the collapse of Soviet-type socialism, that international community that was absolutely neoliberal, but that was committed to certain democratic political forms. That has changed. We are in a different political world these days. So I want to understand what is happening and why. And then, very important, are we going back to swing back to what existed before? Because the politics of Donald Trump, the politics of Boris Johnson, the politics of authoritarianism, that politics is fundamentally flawed, or are we going to drift more and more into authoritarianism? So I want to understand that. So far, my conclusion is that we're not going back to what existed before. And the dominant tendency is going to be towards a continuing drift in the direction of growing authoritarianism. I want to understand why. I want to understand the points of tension, the points of vulnerability in this political slide. And I want to understand how it would be possible to block this and use the force of resistance, the force of democracy to inspire new social movements, new political movements that link the struggle for democracy in the political domain with the struggle for democracy in the economic domain. And if you can put these two together, you have a platform for socialism at this day and age, not a platform for socialism 100 years ago, a platform for socialism right now.
Finally, you are a leading international thinker with respect to the political economy of the global South. So I cannot stop myself from asking the following. Do you think neoliberalism in the global South has some specificity, some qualities that you do not find in advanced capitalist countries?
It is different and it is contextual. It will have particular features that will depend on the history and class relations in those societies. So in Latin America, for example, the region of the world which I have tended to work the most, neoliberalism is very much marked by social exclusion. It is marked by a history of slavery. It is marked by a history of racial and other forms of discrimination. So it always had these very strong authoritarian tendencies, even when those countries had formally democratic political regimes. In other parts of the world, it will be different. In India, it will be different. In Turkey, etc., etc. So, yes, in the sense that in many parts of the South, not all of them, but in many parts of the South, you never had the shift into a society of citizens, which is something that has been achieved in the advanced economies in the West. It is being pushed back. Forms of exclusion are being constituted and reconstituted. I think this is a very significant difference in many contexts, not all contexts, but in many contexts. And I also want to understand those particular dynamics.
Thank you. Robert, did you have any follow-up question for Alfredo on this?
Yeah, on this particular issue, no, but I think...
No, in general, yeah.
But maybe you've already sort of addressed some of the issues of how your particular knowledge and research and thinking and theory it can apply to living struggles, right? I just wanted to maybe give you a chance now to kind of think about how you would articulate those for imagining an audience of activists, of progressive union members, different movements and struggles like Latin America, and what you think, in a sense, in your knowledge that you've produced and generated, in a sense, can move, translate, travel to those movements. I could bring insight for people that normally many times don't have access, for all the unfortunate reasons we know, to the knowledge. And so I just was wondering if it'd be possible for you to do that, especially the struggle, as you already talked about, with capitalism and the attempt to struggle for socialism, and what in those two areas, obviously very interrelated, you have a way of communicating. You think there's your chance to do that? I'll stop there.
This is a very difficult question. I think the fundamental, or one of the fundamental difficulties for me, is that it's not just that the left has been politically disarmed, legally repressed, demoralized for various reasons in this age of neoliberalism. It is that the left has lost a lot of its social base in the traditional way, the traditional mode of existence of the working class. The working class has changed over time because of technology, because of class struggle, because of a whole range of circumstances. And in order to understand the current configuration of capitalism, we have to understand the configuration of capital. How is it that capital exists? And capital is not just money and machines, as we know. it is also the way in which the working class is put to work to produce the material conditions of social reproduction for us. And one thing that neoliberalism has achieved is a very profound degree of disaggregation of the working class, of division and reconstitution of work processes across borders, and division of the workers within countries and between countries. So the difficulties of the trade unions, for example, that I think would be felt by an audience of trade unionists and activists would be, how do we mobilize our base? How do we get back in touch with the workers? How do we motivate them? How do we create the belief that victories can be achieved after a succession of defeats over decades? And this is an extremely difficult question. It is not, I believe, an academic question that we, as colleagues, could resolve. Call an academic conference, we sit down and understand the configuration of the working class and the best way forward for the struggle for socialism. This is a practical question. And the practical question is, is it that we can imagine, understand, anticipate, and reinforce struggles that actually win? And it is on the basis of actual victories that we will understand something new about the nature of capitalism and about the nature of progressive political struggles at this day and age. And then we as academics can look at those struggles and understand certain basic principles and support our activists and colleagues working in trade unions and in social movements, community organizations, to then multiply those struggles in ways that have proven to be potentially victorious. I don't think we as academics start this conversation. We observe and we draw lessons that then can be advanced. Now, to say this is to draw on a more general point. I had mentioned that for each configuration, for each phase of what I call system, for each system of accumulation as a moment within the different modes of existence of capitalism, there is a way in which capital functions. And associated with that, inevitably, there is a way that the working class is configured. And within that, there's a way in which the working class and the capitalist class achieves political representation. And one of the great successes of neoliberalism has been to dismantle the mode of existence, the previous mode of existence of the working class, and in doing this, dismantled our political forms of expression as well. The Bolshevik-type party that represented the working class until perhaps the 1920s or thereabouts, or the 1930s, that no longer functions as an efficient way to represent the working class today. The large social democratic parties of the post-Second World War era, they did represent the working class, not in ways that we like, but they did represent masses of tens of millions of workers in different countries. They don't do that anymore. So how do we identify, how do we find, how we develop the forms of political representation of the working class as it actually exists today under neoliberalism, and achieve the capacity for those tens of millions of people to express their political wishes, their economic demands, and achieve victories? This is the big challenge. But again, to get back to my previous point, this is not a theoretical point. We can have lots of ideas. We need to see what actually works in practice. And that is the challenge. So if I go to a meeting, going back to your question, Robert, if I go to a meeting with activists and trade unionists, etc., I would listen much more than I would speak to try and identify and work with them to identify the basic principles of what actually works. Tell me about experiences that have worked. Tell me about experiences that have failed too, because that's useful as a mirror. But tell me about your experiences that have worked, and then how can we understand your base? How can we trust that we have the best interest of the vast majority on our side? How do we reach out to them and speak in a language that people will understand, will be sensitive to, and it will be prepared to make sacrifices in order to struggle for those ideas? How do we do that? And that is the big challenge. There are multiple experiences around the world of success, still on a small scale, but I'm much more optimistic now than I was 5 or 10 years ago, that we're on course to discover those forms of activism that are efficient against neoliberal capitalism. We just have to do this fairly quickly because the challenges are very serious, both at the level of authoritarianism, the resurgence of fascism or modern forms of fascism, but also in terms of climate change. And without a struggle against capital and capitalism, we will not be able to confront climate change. And this is an existential challenge for not just for the working class, for humanity as a whole. And so the working class as representative of humanity in the hopes for survival of humanity. That's very, very important, very, very urgent. So there's a lot of work to be done on that front.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really very complex and informed way of thinking about it, which is also speaking to the relations between so-called expertise and people that are so-called not rank and file and regular folks and union members and parts of movements, even parts of cadre and political parties and so on. And I'll just put one thing, something you said, which really sparked in my mind a question. I just put myself in that audience, let's say, and they would say, okay, you have this incredible knowledge about authoritarian neoliberalism, right? And we understand it in ways that maybe nobody else understands it. And where's the chink in the armor? Where can we begin to even think about that formation? And what strategy would be what site would we start from? And is there something that you might offer to that person that would ask that question?
My intuition on this is that the biggest vulnerability of neoliberalism is not even on the economic domain. We know that the economies of neoliberalism are vulnerable to crises, particularly finance-driven crises. They have been leading to a growing economic stagnation, to concentration of income, etc. All that is very, very important. But I think the point that is most significant for us to focus on is democracy, and to draw up the connections between the loss of political freedom and the loss of political space with the concentrating of income, wealth, and power, the concentrating dynamics of neoliberalism. And if we can use those two ideas of political democracy and of economic democracy as levers, I think that points to fundamental vulnerabilities within neoliberalism. That we could say, this is a form of existence of ourselves, of our society, that is fundamentally undemocratic, that fundamentally serves the rich, that fundamentally serves the privileged, and we are being excluded from all areas of social life. We are being marginalized. We are being treated as second-class people, not even as citizens deserving of respect within society. And they do not deliver. And they do not deliver. After all this exclusion, they do not deliver improvements in living conditions that are essential for workers, for our welfare. With all the productivity, all the potential, all the capacities of our society, what we have is the reproduction of need in an increasingly oppressive and exclusionary society. So this is my intuition. We have to see if it works in practice. Maybe this is right, maybe this is wrong. But again, to reiterate, I would try this line in my own political activity. I find resonance, but of course, the left is very small and our capacity to change the world is very, very limited at this moment in time. But I would try this one. I would try this angle of approach to focus on the limitations of neoliberalism. Because then the question comes, why is it? Why is this happening? Why is there, what is this exclusionary dynamics? Where does it come from? And then you can talk about the nature of capitalism and how it exists today, and the way in which it has restructured the working class, and the way in which it has reproduced deprivation at all sorts of levels, has created insecurity, has created stress, has created mental health problems, all sorts of needs that people feel in their daily lives, within their families, etc. If you can create this notion that there is a system out there, that things are related, and that we need broad struggles against a form of existence of society, now that is a massive improvement on a situation in which you might feel indignant about specific aspects of neoliberal capitalism, but not quite see the connections between all these issues that bring you unhappiness. And if you can link all these things, I think the prospects to then say, well, this is a systemic issue, that is important. If you want to say capitalism as a system has failed, capitalism as a system is exploitative, is exclusionary, etc., and we need a different system, that's the way to go. We have to build this notion that there is an articulated complex out there that favors the privileged and oppresses the vast majority. If we can do that, I think we are on a good route.
It's really very, very helpful. And it just one last follow-up to that. You talked about representation. Would new logics, new types of practice around representation be helpful in starting on that road in terms of that twin democratization process that you described, right? Both the economic side and the political side. Would that be something that would be helpful to think of as maybe a starting point? Because this has to be started somewhere, as you've said. And I was just wondering.
I think it does have to start from somewhere. I do not believe in forms of disorganized struggle on the part of the workers and the oppressed in the vast majority. I believe we do need a political party to represent the interests of a revolutionary working class. I don't think we can do and achieve victories without that. I don't think Facebook and Telegram and these spontaneous forms of communication through social media can replace a centralized organization that leads discussions, prepares programs, and leads the process of political struggle. Now, the notion of a revolutionary political party of the left has been heavily damaged by experiences over the last several decades. So this is a problem. And the existing political parties of the revolutionary left, certainly in the UK, are a tremendous source of disappointment. And I don't think they would be the vanguard of very much. So I think we will need to consider how the working class actually exists today and what forms of political representation can work in view of this configuration of the working class. What kind of political party can represent their interests? What kind of political party can advance a socialist program on the basis of the conditions that exist today? But nowhere near that. However, we have seen moments of success or experiences that have been incredibly valuable from our point of view. The experience of the Workers' Party in Brazil, the experience of Syriza in Greece, the experience of the Bernie Sanders movement in the United States, the experience of the Labour Party in the UK under Jeremy Corbyn, the experience of Podemos in Spain, all of them ultimately defeated, but all of them showing the depths of dissatisfaction and the capacity of mobilization for forces clearly on the left that can raise the sense of indignation and the determination to act to change the world. Now, they've all failed for different reasons, but they leave something behind, and they leave the lesson that success is possible. Given a certain set of circumstances, success is possible, and it is possible in the case of the UK, the experience I'm reasonably familiar with. You can mobilize 500,000 people into a Labour Party that is distinctively a force of the left. In the case of Brazil, huge, a very large country with huge levels of inequality, is also possible to mobilize the working class with all sorts of problems, with all sorts of deficiencies of leadership, of organization, of mobilization, etc. But the example is there. And I'm confident that we will achieve greater successes in the future. We are getting there. My concern is, are we getting there fast enough? That leaves me with a lot of worry. But all we can do is do the best that we can and then see what happens.
Thank you very much. That's really very important words. Raju, you can close out and say a couple.
Right. I think, okay, I'm keeping track of our time. Well, thank you, Alfredo, for such an interesting, informative, and very productive conversation. And I hope this will be just the first one. We'll have many more with you in the near future, and with other Marxists and radicals from around the world. So thank you again for your insights, both theoretical and political. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Raju. Thank you, Robert. It's a privilege to talk to you.
Same here. Take care.